Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia. Now, over the holidays, I made my way to Abingdon, Virginia, and the Virginia Creeper Trail. Here at the beginning of the trail is Locomotive 433, built in January 1907. It's an actual steam locomotive of the type used on the Virginia Creeper Railroad, which ran along the route of today's trail. What began as an Indian trail later became a railroad that transported timber and people from Abingdon, Virginia, through the mountains to Todd, North Carolina, then once again became a trail, this time for recreation. And there's lots of history along the trail we'll share with you today. Across that pond is Black's Fort Inn, named for the fort built by Joseph Black to protect the local settlers at what became Wolf Hills from Cherokee attacks. Today I'm going to take you along with me and my best buddy here, Roxy, as I walk the Virginia Creeper Trail. Black's Fort in Wolf Hills became Abingdon in 1778, said to be named for Martha Washington's ancestral English home of Abingdon-on-Thames in Berkshire. Now, the name Wolf Hills, by the way, came from Daniel Boone, whose dogs were attacked by wolves as he passed through the area in 1760. Now, here's where the railroad Y was located. That's W-Y-E, but really should just be Y because of its shape, shaped like a Y. There were short rail lines shaped like that Y where trains could turn themselves around without the use of a turntable, like you'd go up one leg, back down the other leg, and then go back in a different direction from where you came. They did this so they could get by without using a turntable, and this park now sits where that Y was located. Just look for the raised parts of the ground, and you'll find where those short rail lines once sat at a sort of a Y intersection there. Now, one thing you'll see along the trail are farms, at least between Abingdon and Alvarado, and that makes for some very pretty scenery to enjoy as you walk or ride your bike. The Abingdon Coal and Iron Railroad Company formed to secure land to build a railroad from Abingdon to Damascus in the late 1880s in order to transport the region's natural resources to market. By the Depression of 1893, that railroad had run out of money to continue without laying a single rail. In 1894, their assets were bought by the Virginia Western Coal and Iron Railroad Company, which began the hard work of building a mountain railroad. This is one of the original stone mileposts. This one is the first one, marking 1 mile from the old Norfolk and Western Depot in Abingdon and not the beginning of the Virginia Creeper Trail. Up ahead's the reason this is a recreational trail and not a working railroad. That, folks, is Interstate 81, which runs up the Valley of Virginia into Pennsylvania and New York. Now, the coming of the interstate highway system put the nail into the coffin for small branch rail lines like the Virginia-Carolina Railroad. And even though you're surrounded by all those farms and all those cattle, you know you're not out in the middle of nowhere because of all that traffic noise you're hearing. Now, here you can see that the trees along the trail are newer than the ones we've been walking through. That's because a tornado came through this area in April 2011 and cleared out the trees that were here, and the ones you see have since grown back. And we'll tell you more about that tornado here in just a little bit. Before long, this new company, too, found it bitten off more than it could chew and went bankrupt, just like the one before it. A freight agent for Norfolk and Western Railroad in Roanoke, Milton E. Minga, was aware that lumber was at a premium in the country as America built itself out over the continent. He also knew there was plenty of lumber in Appalachia and decided to form a new company, the Virginia-Carolina Railroad Company. He bought those assets from the former owners and began to concentrate on building a railroad to transport timber instead of iron and coal. Farms aren't the only things you'll find next to the trail. There's also a golf course and subdivision you'll pass as well, as you can see by both a road and a golf cart crossing. Well, folks, there are places in Appalachia where the sun doesn't shine all day, and this is what you find there for a long time after snow's melted everywhere else. But Roxy and I traveled on, although it was very slippery. Just imagine working in snowy and icy conditions building the railroad at the turn of the 20th century. Eventually, we decided to call it a day as it got worse and worse and came back in a few days. On April 27, 2011, a tornado outbreak occurred across East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, stretching from Chattanooga to Glade Springs, resulting in 35 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and massive amounts of damage. One of the places to be hit was the Virginia Creeper Trail. Now, if you look up on that hilltop, just to the left of center, you'll see trees that don't look right, like they don't have all their branches. That's where a tornado came up and over that hill, leaving downed trees and debris, as you can see in this picture I took a year after that twister hit. You might see it better in this shot. The tornado came down into the dip below, which was crossed by Trestle 7, then lifted it up and smashed it to the ground into a million pieces. Now, nobody was hurt there, but a link in the Creeper Trail was destroyed. Work to rebuild came quickly, as you can see here in this 2014 picture. Now, the gravel road next to the trestle was the temporary trail, and it was a real feat to get up the hill on a bike, if you could do it at all. In February 1900, the Virginia-Carolina Railroad ran its first train from Abingdon to Damascus. The line was extended to White Top, Virginia in 1912, and then 6 years later on to Elkland, now Todd, in North Carolina. And during this time, the Norfolk and Western, Minga's old boss, bought into the railroad, allowing it to do that expansion without breaking the bank. Hard times came to the Virginia Creeper train, with passenger and freight service declining due to the rise of the interstate highways. The Norfolk and Western Railroad abandoned the line, with the last train running on March 31st, 1977, and the rails removed beginning later that year. Yep, I said farms. I meant farms. Hello, cows. Much of the rock you'll see in this part of the Virginia Creeper Trail is limestone, which is dissolved by water to make sinkholes and caves, like this small one beside the trail. This is the South Holston River, which flows alongside the trail for the next few miles, up until we reach South Holston Lake. I'd imagine this must have been the site seen by the first settlers to move into this part of Appalachia. Imagine what it must have been like to have to cut your way through all that rock with hand tools and dynamite in order to lay down a roadbed. Another view of that limestone rock face left over when the roadbed was made. And speaking of South Holston Lake, here we are. This is the longest trestle on the Virginia Creeper Trail, as you can see. It spans the lake at this point, although in January there's really very little water in there. Usually the lake is several feet above this level in the summer, as you can see from the sand on the banks down below. Now, where did the name Virginia Creeper come from, you might ask? Well, it has two origin stories. The first says it was named for the vine that grows in the area, the five-leaf Virginia Creeper plant. The other, more popular story says the line got its name from the lumber-laden locomotives that struggled to make the grade up the mountain to Todd, just barely, quote-unquote, creeping along. Yeah, you take your pick. With the end of the railroad, a Washington County Planning Commission member, Dave Brillhart, M.D., shared an article with his fellow members from the Washington Post in which a new trend was developing, making hiking and biking trails from old, unused, and abandoned railway corridors. The commission, along with local trail enthusiasts, assisted by the U.S. Forest Service, which had bought the rail bed rights on Forest Service land, decided to move ahead on the project, and the Virginia Creeper Trail was soon born. And we've reached the end of this part of our trip, Alvarado Station. We'll continue our journey on a future episode. Be sure to click that subscribe button and ding that bell to get notified whenever we release a new episode. And we'd really like it if you give us a like. Till next we meet. So long, everybody.